You know how some people, mainly straight people, get irritated when gays say that a certain character in a movie or show is queer, when it hasn't been explicitly stated. Especially when it's an old character, maybe from their favorite cartoon or show. They often say, not everyone has to be gay and stop ruining my childhood or whatever, not realizing that gay people for the longest time had to read between the lines and search for crumbs of queer representation on screen, because characters in movies were queer-coded. In the early days of Hollywood, homosexuality in movies mostly existed only as a way to make people laugh, as a joke. Gay men were depicted as sissies, and gay women were portrayed as super masculine. Obviously, these things weren't okay, but at least queer people were getting some representation on screen, because in 1930s everything changed. Why? Our one and only Mr. Censorship. The production code, also known as the Hays Code, was established due to boycotts and protests from religious groups in the 1920s and 30s. They were worried about the moral side of Hollywood films and what impact they had on the public. The code prohibited the depiction of any form of sex perversion, and unfortunately, homosexuality fell under that category at that time. However, for all its efforts, the Hays Code didn't erase homosexuals from screens, it just made them harder to find. And now they had a new identity as cold-blooded villains. That's when queer coding and subtext became prominent. Picture an iceberg with heterosexuality at the top and homosexuality at the bottom. For a heterosexual viewer, the narrative is also heterosexual, but if a queer person watches the same film, they will find interesting undertones and themes. Basically, if you know, you know. Horror especially became a perfect genre for directors to employ this tactic, turning queer characters into monsters. And in this video, I'll be talking about the evolution of queer female characters in horror movies. Dracula's Daughter was one of the first horror films with evident lesbian subtext. The film follows the daughter of now dead Dracula, Countess Maria Zaleska, who wants to free herself from the curse of vampirism, or maybe lesbianism. She tries burning her father's body as she believes it will solve everything, but to no avail. She still feels these strange cravings that result in her seeking help from a psychiatrist. Gay conversion therapy immediately comes to mind, especially when you hear how the Countess talks about her secret. She wants to live a normal life and think normal things. The doctor advises her to confront the cravings. Zaleska asks her manservant to find a model for her to paint. A pretty young blonde girl named Lily is brought to the Countess. Zaleska offers her wine and food and compliments her on her beautiful hands. The Countess tells the new model to take off her blouse in order to study her shoulders. The sexual tension is palpable. The Countess hypnotizes Lily and bites her off screen while the camera shifts to the devil mask on the wall. In the original script, Lily was supposed to pose nude, but the head of the production code administration, Joseph Breen, paid special attention to the scene and wrote this: "The present suggestion that Lily poses in the nude will be changed. She will be posing her neck and shoulders, and there will be no suggestion that she undresses, and there will be no exposure of her person." It was also stated that the present incomplete sequence will be followed by a scene in which Lily is taken to a hospital, and there it will be definitely established that she has been attacked by a vampire. The whole sequence will be treated in such a way as to avoid any suggestion of perverse sexual desire on the part of a Maria or of an attempted sexual attack by her upon Lily. This instance isn't the only one. Once Zaleska realizes she can't control her urges, she accepts the fact that she can't be cured and kidnaps the doctor's secretary and love interest, Janet. That's when the second lesbian scene occurs, the scene that was described as the longest kiss never filmed. Zaleska is hovering over hypnotized Janet, gazing at her like she is longing to kiss her. Gay film historian Vito Russo noted in his book The Celluloid Closet that Universal Studios hinted at Countess Zaleska's attraction to women in some of its advertising for the film, using the tagline, "Save the women of London from Dracula's daughter." Unfortunately, the Countess doesn't get a happy ending, like we're all surprised, and gets killed by her jealous manservant. Here's the heteronormative plot for ya. In 1943, the movie The Seventh Victim comes out, embracing lesbianism and satanism. The film tells the story of a young woman named Mary who is searching for her missing sister Jacqueline. Mary unravels a lot of secrets and discovers that Jacqueline became a member of a satanic cult. The cult wanted to get rid of her older sister because she revealed their existence to her psychiatrist. As you might have already guessed, Jacqueline is a gay one in the family. And there is enough evidence to back it up. Number 1. Mary finds out that Jacqueline has married a lawyer, Gregory Ward, but decided to keep her maiden name. At one point, Gregory tells Mary, "There is something about your sister a man can never quite get hold of." Jacqueline doesn't show any love for her husband. When Mary together with Gregory finally discover Jacqueline's hiding place, she's very happy to finally hug her sister, but not her husband. She even gives him a weird look. Number 2. Jacqueline owned a hair salon and had a relationship with her hairdresser Francis, who was also a member of the cult. Mary learns that Jacqueline actually sold her business when she comes to the salon to question Francis, who explains that she used to be intimate with Jacqueline and prefers her over her new boss. But everything becomes even clearer when Jacqueline gets captured by cult members and is forced to kill herself by drinking poison. She doesn't budge at first, but when Francis finally breaks down begging Jacqueline to finally end it all, she surprisingly gives in, only to be stopped by Francis, who sobbingly confesses that she can't let her die because the only time she was ever happy was when she was with Jacqueline. Romeo and Juliet can suck it. And number 3. The cult itself embodies everything that is not traditional and not normal, including homosexuality. It seems that the film's message is, gay people are so scary, they are recruiting others and destroying their lives, be aware. Jacqueline is depressed and miserable and confused, and it appears that she's been like that for a very, very long time, even before the cult, and that's why she decided to start seeing a psychiatrist in the first place. The ending, well, it's just devastating. Other honorable mentions from this decade are Cat People and The Uninvited. In Cat People, the main heroine, Irena, a Serbian immigrant, struggles with her identity as she believes she is cursed. Irena thinks that if she gets intimate with someone and succumbs to her urges and passions, she will turn into a panther and kill them. She desires to be normal and marries Oliver, an architect, but is unable to even sleep with him in the same room, let alone kiss him. She tries seeing a psychiatrist, but it doesn't help, obviously. Eventually her marriage falls apart and she gets killed after a physical altercation with her doctor. The Uninvited is a bit different. It's a supernatural horror that tells the story of a brother and a sister who move to a haunted house and slowly uncover family secrets of previous owners. The plot is quite complicated with its twists and turns, but there is a lesbian subtext between one of the ghosts named Mary Meredith and her nurse at the time, Miss Holloway. Miss Holloway plays a very powerful and stern woman who runs a sanitarium named the Mary Meredith Retreat. She admired Mary when the latter was alive, but a little bit too much.
Mary was a goddess. Her skin was radiant and that bright, bright hair.
Both women are villains in the story, but at least one of them stays alive. The horror films of the 1930s and 40s acted as the social commentary on how gay people are treated and what fate awaits them. They are monsters, villains, and not normal. Their abnormality/homosexuality is considered to be a mental illness and should be treated. If they can't be treated, which is like, as we've seen, is the only outcome of the treatment, it's better to get rid of them, because they won't have a fulfilling life anyways. The horror movies of the next decade, the 50s, absorbed the science fiction genre. There are way more sci-fi horror movies examples about gay men than gay women, but one that can be mentioned is Cat Women of the Moon, which has a ridiculous plot about a race of cat women who are discovered on the moon. Yes, everything is in the title. Basically, there are a bunch of lesbians that can dance and control other women's minds, and they want to get all women on Earth under their power and rule the whole world. Do they manage to do that? No, they die. The 1960s rolled around, bringing supernatural horror and sprinkles of queer female characters here and there. The most famous one is Theodora, or Thea from The Haunting, based on a story about ghost hunters that want to prove the existence of the supernatural, called The Haunting of Hill House. Thea possesses both chic confidence and vulnerability. It's unclear if she's attracted to another main heroine, Eleanor, as they often switch between bickering and tightly holding onto each other in bed. One thing is certain though, Thea is a lesbian. The director of the movie, Robert Wise, revealed in the Warner Brothers DVD's commentary that the original script featured a breakup scene between Thea and her partner before her departure for the Hill House. However, because Hays Code was still in place, Wise decided to cut out that lesbian scene. The demise of the production code in the late 1960s allowed queer female characters to come out of the darkness, but only to please heterosexual male audience. It was lesbian vampire boom of the 70s. Movies of this decade feature erotic scenes between female vampires or a female vampire and an ordinary woman. They're always conventionally attractive, very feminine, white and thin, straight out of the man's sexual fantasies. In the end, they often get killed by the male protagonist, asserting male dominance and reaffirming the belief that heterosexuality is the only path. Despite the fact that these B-movies did a poor job at representing queer characters, they still pushed them into the masses and solidified the sexy vampire trope. Some representation is better than none in the end. 1980s gave birth to the Stalker and slasher films. Queer female characters got a chance to be both stalker/killer and a victim. In the movie Windows, for instance, a woman named Andrea becomes obsessed with her neighbor Emily to the point of hiring a man to assault her and get an audio tape of her moaning. Big yikes. Emily, after this traumatic experience, decides to move to a different apartment complex, which doesn't stop Andrea from turning into a peeping Tom and watch Emily with a telescope. You can guess how this love story turned out. A slasher classic, the Slumber Party Massacre, mocked the genre and showed women in a new light, pitting them against male violence and dominance. The poster itself says it all. The girls on screen are not explicitly lesbian, however, you can argue that they are heavily queer-coded. The script was in fact written by lesbian author Rita Mae Brown. The most notable instances are seen in supporting characters, the handywomen. The first woman you see gives an interesting answer to a question asked by a young guy.
Would you ever consider dating a younger man? I mean, you know what they say about younger men. Try it, you'll like it.
I hadn't really thought about it.
She shows her disinterest in the opposite sex and actually becomes the first victim. The second handywoman who shows up on the screen just looks like a stereotypical butch lesbian. There's also a scene with two main girls looking at each other while showering, and I might be biased, but no straight person will do something like that. The AIDS outbreak in the 80s didn't go unnoticed in the cinema. It's been always closely linked with negative attitudes towards queer people, so there is no surprise that you can find examples of that in horror. One that can be given is the movie called The Kiss, that is about a parasite that can be passed on from one woman to another through the kiss. Next decades, to be frank, didn't bring anything new in terms of the genres and themes. Gay characters took on various roles. 90s gifted us with such an icon, a young FBI trainee Clarice Starling from The Silence of the Lambs. Single white female taught us to choose our roommates wisely. 2000s gave us May to Cry About and The Descent to test our fear of claustrophobia. And I haven't even talked about foreign films like Martyrs and High Tension. Nowadays, you can find queer female characters in the leading or supporting roles. Horror is either used to tell the queer experience of the protagonist, or it's completely unrelated to the gayness of the characters. You just get a story and some characters that happen to be of a different background, sexuality, or ethnicity. Of course, we don't get a lot of films like that every year, and having such representation doesn't automatically mean the movie is good. But we're getting there, and I'm excited to see what horror genre will bring to the table in the future.